In this video I will give a short introduction of basic structures of every program, how we can get into Python or NodeJS programming, and how we can actually start creating a trading bot with NodeJS. One of our introduction to programming and creating a trading bot. Basic concepts in programming. There are basically three main constructs: the sequence, the selection, I usually call it conditional flow, or loops or iterations, how I call it. There I put the link into the PDF of the video, see in the description, with further information on sequence, selection and loops. Just to give you an example, let's say we have this playground where the person we need to get to the diamond. So we basically have different possibilities to do that. We could do it by using straight sequence programming: move right, move right, move right, move down, move down, move down, move down, move down, move right, move right, move right, move right. But it's rather tedious to do that way. We could do it with iterations. Once to the right, like this part here, one to the right, and then move 5 times down and move 6 times to the right, and we're here. Or we could create it with conditional iterations. Move down until obstacle, zack, move right until obstacle, zack, move down, move right until diamond. Or even a bit more complicated programming with conditions and iterations. Move down 3 times on 1, 2, 3 until end, also as long as I can continue. If water, then swim, else move right. So we move right, now comes the water, so we need to swim. Now it's again soil, so we move right. Move down until diamond. So that's basically a very simplified example of these structures. Sequence, selection, I call it condition, and loops or iterations. And what I basically want to say by that is there is no perfect solution for any problem. It always depends on the conditions you have. Maybe the condition says you need to bring a leaf to the diamond from each of the tree, or you need to be as far as with little changes in directions as possible, or any other precondition, and depending on that precondition, your algorithm will evolve. The most important tip I have for you: decomplexify the problem. Try to reduce the complexity of the problem at hand. If you don't know how to move right or down, try to first just do that. One move to the right, one move down. If you then would like to use iterations, check out iterations first. Do something 5 times, see how it works. Then you can apply that to move down 5 times or move right 5 times. I usually do those loop checks with numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. The same you can do with the conditions, or with iterations where you do until something happens. Walk until you reach the water, because then you need to swim. You cannot walk over the water. Okay. Another crucial concept is functions. Functions are usually not every programming language calls them functions. Some call them procedures, subs, definitions, or other similar terms. I put a link to a page where a function is basically explained. Basically, it encapsulates a piece of code. Usually we do this to declutter, to make it more clean or readable. Or if you need to call a piece of code repeatedly in the very same way. If you call that piece of code repeatedly, then that piece of code, that function, would also be the first suspect to be improved for its performance, because every time you call that function, you would gain from the improved performance. So in the get to the diamond example, let's say you have an intelligent way to go back to the start square. Maybe you traced a thread behind you which you can simply walk back to get to the start square. So basically in that case we could create a function go back to the start square, which is following back the thread you left while you went on wandering, and the second function would be get to the diamond, because from the start square it would always work the same way. Functions usually come in three shapes. There are variations of it, obviously. You call them, they perform the same steps every time, like in our example, get to the diamond. But you can also create functions which accept parameters. Then in that case they will have the same logic, but they will work on different premises usually. Or you can call a function and get a value in return. Let me give you an example for all the three of them. Function get to the diamond, as long as you issue that command and you're on the start square, it will always behave the same. Now, function get to the diamond with a parameter of a 25 kilogram backpack. In that case, your code would want to avoid to need to swim through the water, as the backpack would pull you down. And the last example would be where we actually receive back the elapsed time it took to get to the diamond. Then there is another important thing in programming, and that's data types. Each language defines data types in a different way. As data types, we usually have strings, numbers like integer or floats or variations thereof. Usually there is a date, time data type, Boolean, which contains true or false, important for conditions, and arrays and or lists or variations thereof. In some languages we know the term maps, hash maps or other maps. Arrays are usually referenced by an index number, and lists or maps are referenced by a keyword. The second point in my agenda, introduction into programming, is rather quick. I have created a PDF in the description of the video. Please check out that PDF. It contains all important links and information you need to get started in either Python or NodeJS, which basically is uses JavaScript as programming language. Either have their pros and cons. NodeJS or JavaScript is rather simple to understand for programming purposes, but it has its issues with asynchronous tasks, like tasks you call a web server and you wait for a result, and in the meantime the code continues to run, which is in many times not what you want, because you actually want to do something with the result. In that respect, Python is way easier to use, because it actually waits nicely for the result of such a call to a web service or so. On the other hand, Python is way more strict on syntax. As an example, a tab may look like 4 spaces, but the interpreter interprets it differently and will tell you so while you try to run the Python code. So for Python, I have a link to get you started. On that page you find basically the most basic stuff you need to start programming. You need to install the programming environment. Then you need to decide on an IDE, an integrated development environment. And my choice is code from Visual Studio. From Microsoft, it's really nice and it works well for both Python and Node.js. But maybe you have other interesting IDEs you may propose in the comments of the video, or interesting pointers to tutorials. Then usually each language has a language reference. The link to that is here. The second link is very important. It talks about the lexical analysis of Python, and this is again very crucial to understand, because a tab, it looks like 4 spaces, but it's not, and Python interprets that differently, and it's very strict on that. So it took me like literally hours after starting to develop with Python to get the hang on it, but a good IDE will basically support in formatting the code properly. Then you need to learn how to install modules such as SQLite 3 for database purposes, or WebSockets, or any other thing. An ideal tutorial to work through is the tutorial on the Python page, because there it goes through all the important stuff I've been talking about before, the sequence, the iterations, the conditions, and it also has a link to the full API of the language. For Node.js, it's basically the same. You install Node.js first, the link is here. Then you need to use an IDE. You can use basically any text editor if you want, as long as it really saves just text. So Word isn't the text editor. Word will save formatting as well, unless you tell it to save just the text. But Notepad would be an alternative, a very simple one though. Then I would recommend you work your way through the JavaScript tutorials here on that page. It's rather simple, and once you have done that, you can start to actually create your own web server. There is a tutorial on the same website, W3 Schools for Node.js, and it actually, like with, I don't know, 20 or 30 lines of code, you have a running web server, which is pretty neat to see. On the JavaScript side, again with the link, there you will see on the left hand side, you will see the constructs JavaScript offers. I recommend working through that list of constructs or concepts to get really a hang of JavaScript, on what it's all about. Usually it's, for me, I know how to program basically, so if I need to learn a new programming language, it's usually always the same process. I install the language like I explained before for Python or for Node.js, and then I start playing around with it. And by playing around with it, I mean you should get a feeling for it. You should know how to create outputs, like put a text on screen. Usually it's the console for these two languages, Python and Node.js, but it could be other means of output. And by getting a feeling for the language, I mean you should really feel comfortable with knowing how to define variables of the different types, so that you can do different stuff, that you can calculate with numbers, that you can concatenate and manipulate strings, like you have a sentence and you want to have the third word or the second character of a word, or you want the final part of the word or the initial part of a word, stuff like that. Get yourself comfortable with those things. Then you also should learn how to format code properly. In some languages you need a semicolon to end a line. In some you don't. JavaScript is either you can end a line with the semicolon, but you don't have to. Then very important is to know how you create commands. In Python it's the hash. In the hash character. In NodeJS it's the double slash. It's not backslash, double slash. Then you should in every language get a feeling how to use condition, if, else, the iterations for, like for is usually used for if you need to do something 5 times, or do it as many times as an array is long or something. While do and while are more connected with conditions. Do as long as something is wrong or so. Then another important thing is you should get yourself comfortable with operators, arithmetic operators, Boolean operators and string operators. The arithmetic operators will allow you to calculate. Programming is usually about calculating numbers or formatting strings or putting strings somewhere else in a database, as example. And the Boolean operators will help you make decisions, if not, and, or, whatever. And for each of these examples you create, I would recommend you create your own program and you name it like that. So if you create the test for if else, then name the file if.py or if.js. If you do a test how the while construct works, then name the file while.py or while.js. And the same if you start getting the hang of it, how it works a little bit better, and you want to learn how to read from local files, then name the file read-write-files.py or gs. And the very important thing is try to make clean code from the beginning. And I gave 4 examples. I will not go into details, but please look at the PDF, because it's really important to understand what I'm talking about there by making clean error. Actually, one thing I wanted to point out. Usually, if you have a condition with a constant, in this case it's true, then put the constant on the left hand side, because if you just forget one of the equal signs, some of the languages will tell you cannot assign a variable, in this case my Boolean, to a constant, when they will figure out that there is a missing equal sign. So that's one tip which helped me in the past quite a lot. Then you should also learn how to catch errors. The earlier you learn to catch errors, the easier it is to debug your own code. First, you should get a feeling how errors are handled in general. I refer to my most important tip: decomplexify programs or problems. So basically, first you need to learn how does error handling work. And once you know how it works, you basically try to program that error handling in a way that it's kind of reusable. I usually use a function within the error handler, and within that function I can then decide, let's say on the debug level of an application, let's say when I'm testing I want to have more information output, and when I'm running productive I want to really just show warnings or errors. And the last step obviously is develop your logic, and that means you need to think about what you want to achieve. Remember my most important tip: decomplexify problems. And I just told you in the example of the error handling how you can decomplexify it. First look at how error handling works just as such, and once you know it, then you can try to make it applicable in every situation with a function or something. And an important thing to search on the web for help. Usually you will put the language first, Python or NodeJS, and then what you want to do, how to define a function, or how to iterate an array, or how to write to a file, or for NodeJS, how to write JSON structures or how to read JSON structures. Usually you will see results from Stack Overflow, and the results there are usually really good results. There is mostly always one answer which has a check mark, which means it's the approved answer for the question at hand. Now you learned about the basic structures in programming, the sequence, the iterations and the conditions. You have learned about data types very roughly. You have learned about functions, what they're used for. You have learned about that you should invest some time into learning about how to catch and handle errors. And the most important tip, and I will repeat that you, in every problem you come across, that you should decomplexify. Usually it's really helpful to just create a simple application with just those 5 lines of code you want to get to work. And once you know how it works properly, then you take that approach and put it into your code. I had a colleague once at work, he had at times brilliant ideas, but he used to implement his ideas directly into the application. And then after like 4 hours or so he came to me and told me it doesn't work. And I told him, well, what's the problem? And he said, well, I don't know. And then I usually told him, then take that piece out, put it somewhere else where you just test that functionality, and if it works, then you know that your approach works. So if in your application it doesn't work, that means that it's not your approach which doesn't work, but there is some side effect which you need to make sure that isn't interfering with your approach. That also, this decomplexify problems helps really a lot in finding problems. So, creating a trading bot with Node.js, 3 parts. Actually, that's my proposal, and don't nail me on any of the terminology and stuff. It's really high level. The parts are creating a Websocket client, creating a client which can consume the API of the exchange, and create your logic. For the WebSocket in Node.js, you need to install the WS module, and then you basically go and test. Basically it's like that you create a connection, a WebSocket client, and that you where is the message? Here. On open, genau, when it's open, then we send the message, the WebSocket, an API call. The API call in that respect now is from Bitstamp. Bitstamp subscribe, and the date is the event. It's like a JSON format, and the data object is the channel, and what you're actually interested in. Because I'm usually focused on XRP, I'm interested in live trades XRP per US dollar. So each XRP which is traded in US dollar, I will receive an appropriate information. That's basically it. So creating the web client, then you can have this event handler on open. So as soon as the WebSocket is open, that function here is called. We output the connected, and then we send to the WebSocket this code that we want to subscribe. And from then on, it's basically rather simple. There are coming messages in, and we again have an event handler on message every time such a message is coming in. I'm parsing it, I'm checking it if it's really a trade, and I'm doing something with it. Here in the example, you can see I will call my logic. That's the third part of our introduction to creating a trading bot, and do something with the price, either sell or buy more or whatever. In my example, I just do a log to the console with the amount and the price of the last trade. That's basically it for the WebSocket client. Now creating the Exchange client is a little bit more complicated. It's way more code due to the reason that you need to kind of create headers for the HTTP requests you're going to issue, and this is not so easy. In Bitstamp examples on the API page of Bitstamp, there were Python examples, and unfortunately some of the documentation was rather wrong. So when I converted it to NodeJS, it didn't work right away, so I had to really figure out where the problem is, but eventually I got it working. So basically you install those four modules: HTTPS, UTF-8, UUID, and crypto. Crypto is used to sign the message. Those having a knowledge about cryptocurrencies know that the transaction always needs to be signed, and that's the same case in this API. And you basically sign the message with your API secret. I will show you later on how that's done. And thus Bitstamp can verify that it's really me calling them and wanting to do something, and not someone. It's basically the security measures. So basically we have some constant variables like the Bitstamp server, the content type. Those are the various URLs I can call on the API for the post, for the get. And then I have created a class Bitstamp client with a dummy constructor. I need for each call a new timestamp, a nonce. A nonce is kind of like a random number. In the documentation they basically tell it could be a timestamp, but in reality it isn't. You really have to use this UUID version 4, then it works. Then the set fields, that's basically when you, in some of those calls you can submit parameters, like you want to create a limit order to buy XRP. Then you need to tell how many dollars you want to invest and at which price you want to execute. So those the dollar and the price would be the fields. and those you need to set here. So as example, you need to supply in a string offset equals 1 or amount equals 10 or whatever. Create request message, that's basically a precondition function to calculate the signature properly. We can see that here right below in the create signature, it requires the whole message we are sending to the server. That's basically it. And for the post method, we need to create the header, that's that part. Then we have callback functions for the responses. Callback means, I will show that to you, we have the post. So basically I create my call, whatever I need, and then I, on this HTTPS class, I send a request with my options, and I use a callback function, because the code will then wait, and once there is a result, it will then call the callback with the response from the result, and this I can then track, and I have written here goes your logic. In my case, I just parse the result as JSON. Okay, then we had the post, then we have two post examples. I can post and do an HTTP post to get my own transactions with a default of 2, but I can also have more, or I can see my account balance. Then the get method is way more simple. It has simpler options and stuff, but it also calls the callback, which then parses the result. For the get, I can, with very simple call, I can have an hourly ticker, a daily ticker, an order book, or I can see the transactions. Later on you will see how it works. I made a few examples in the video to see how it works. And finally you need to create your logic. So basically the WebSocket part gets all those trades which are done. The Bitstamp or whatever other exchange you're working with API handles the interaction with Bitstamp as such, if you want to cancel or create an order, or if you want to know about your balance. But then you also need to know your logic, and I have really created a very simplified logic. So basically I have one method which is called decide. It receives the price. It receives the price from the code here in the Websocket Client. So I receive the message, I parse it, I parse the price, I parse it into a number, parse float, and then I call from my logic this decide. And the decide is really, that's where your creativity goes in. I made it pretty simple. In the end of the function, I store the last price. So when the next time a trade comes in, I compare the previous price with the current price, and then I know the price rises. So basically all should be fine. If the price drops, I then can decide, do I want to sell or buy more? So that's really up to you. And maybe you can put in here like percentages of price differences. You could create like here an array of prices, let's say every minute or so, that you save the previous prices, so that you can track back in history how did the price drop compared to like before 15 minutes or before an hour or so. And depending on that, you could actually decide to sell or buy or whatever. First part. the WebSocket client. Basically it connects the WebSocket from the exchange and it will receive, usually it's trades being executed on the exchange. As soon as a trade is executed, it will be received by the WebSocket client and the results will be displayed. We have now a trade at 1146 XRP at 21 cents, etc. Sometimes there come like 3 at a time, sometimes it's 1. It really depends on how the trades are executed. That's really the nice thing about the WebSocket. It just listens to the exchange and receives all trades being executed. Logic would work. Here I'm basically faking the prices, but this is something you could build in easily into your WebSocket client directly. So that's what we see. We define a logic object from the logic class, and then we submit some prices 1, 2, 3, 2, 1 with the method decide. And now let's see what happens. So basically we initiate with 0, the price goes to 1, the result is the price rises, all should be fine. Then we submit the price of 2, the old price was 1, prices are still rising, all should be fine. Then the price rises to 3, the old was 2, prices are rising, all should be fine. Then we submit 2, the previous price was 3, price drops, maybe sell or buy more. Then it drops to 1, the previous price was 2, the price is dropping again, maybe sell or buy more. The exchange client works. We will call now first the get account balance. So that will be the result of the count balance. It basically tells me for each coin Bitstamp offers my available coins, my balance, what is reserved, and the withdrawal fee. Now let's take the next example, user transactions. Here I will just receive the last one, and if we call the daily ticker, that's the result from the exchange client. Bitstamp has a rather neat feature. It's called sub-accounts, and I really propose using it because that way you can restrict the funds you're testing with. You log on to your Bitstamp account, go to account and sub-accounts, and you click on sub-accounts and it will show you the accounts you have. I have 3 sub-accounts already. So click the button create new to create a new sub-account. Enter a name and hit the create sub-account button. Then check if it's there. You need to create an API key password set in order to be able to access it. Do that by clicking on settings and then you go to API access, which brings you here. Click on the new API key and then you scroll down. You select basically the account. We will select the demo for the video, the account we just created. I want to be able to check user balance. I want to be able to check my transactions. I may be interested to transfer amount balances to my main account. I want to be able to open orders, to cancel orders, to buy limit market orders, to sell limit market orders. And that's about it. And I'm interested in withdrawals. I'm not interested. Right. So basically, I now enter my 2FA code that you cannot see. It's entered, and the secret is now here for my demo account for the video. This will only be shown once, so you basically copy that and store it for save, because once I enable it, and that's it. So as you can see here below on the other accounts, this secret, the password, isn't visible anymore, so make sure you don't lose it.